Hey guys, welcome to the latest episode of LexDiscuss Cafe, the podcast where we explore the intricacies of legal world with some of the most brilliant minds in the industry. Today, we are honored to introduce our distinguished guest, Mandeep Chaudhery. Mandeep has had a fascinating career, to say the least. He completed his education at Law College in India before relocating to Canada. He is currently employed at Nanda and Associate and specializes in immigration law. Today, he will be sharing his experiences, insights, and advice on immigration process to Canada. Be sure to listen to this podcast till the end, as this is an episode you won't want to miss. So let's start this podcast. So Mandeep, welcome to Let's Discuss Cafe. How are you feeling?
I'm all right. Thank you, sir. Thank you for asking.
It's completely our pleasure. So Mandeep, you have had a very interesting journey. Like you did your law and CS from India, then you immigrated to Canada. So tell us about that transition.
It started when I was kind of finished my graduation back in 2006. My uncle came from Canada and he says, "What's your option?" I said, "I have three options to do. I can be a lawyer. One of my friend is wanna be a lawyer. Second option is I can do an MBA, or third option is very popular at that time. Write an exam or be a judiciary, something around that side." He said, "Okay, why not you start looking into being a lawyer? In our family, there's no lawyer." And then that's how I get into law. And at that time, being in a law school, I given only one, I think there was no LSAT at that time, but there was an individual exam. So Punjab University, that's the only college I actually put a name for. I give an exam, and I think I was lucky enough that I get in. And then one of my friend was doing CS, and that's how I get into CS and law. So there's no background for law itself. From first day in the law school in India, I tell my professors, they said, "What's your end goal? Like, what do you want to do in your life?" I said, "I want to practice in Canada." So that thing was clear that I want to be a lawyer in Canada, but I was studied in India. So I finished my law in 2009. And in 2010, I came to Canada as a student because at that time, there is no pathway. They kind of stopped a foreign skilled worker pathway. So that's how my journey started. I came in 2010 as a student. I studied for 1 year program here, not LLM, but it's human resource management, very simple course, which is related to my background in commerce. And then it took me a couple of years. I went to a different province. That's where I get my immigration. And 2014, I started my journey in kind of legal Rome in Canada. And 2015, I was called in Saskatchewan. So there's a province in Canada where I was called. So I'm called in two different provinces. One is in Saskatchewan, one is in Ontario. And I was called in 2020 in Ontario. So that's kind of my journey from graduation, different field, different country, to being a lawyer in Canada.
Wow. Such an inspiring story. And, I'm sure a lot of our listeners also aspire to do the same, right? Because, we have all seen that, you do BTech in India and then you go for a MBA and then you settle in the Canada or the US, right? But it's rarely seen for lawyers, right? I think you're one of the very few who are absolutely dead clear that you want to practice law in Canada. But in my experience, that's not the case, right? And a lot of people do LLM in Canada or the US with that expectation that they will ultimately get a job as an MBA candidate too. But that's not what happens with majority. Why do you think that's the case?
So when I came in, immigration scenarios are different, right? And also a lot of people, when they finish their law school in India, they start practicing in India. And when you start practicing few years, then after that you said, okay, let's do MBA. For me, that was not an option. I just finished my LLB. And then I said, okay, I need to go because I was saying to everybody that I want to practice in Canada. My aunt and my family was here. So they always put this in my mind that you have to practice in Canada, something how. And then that's what my journey. But what I've seen, because now I practice immigration law exclusively, I've seen a lot of people come here on LLM, because it give you more time, it give you more work permit to get the permanent residence, because the goal is to get a permanent residence in Canada. Then only you can practice law, right? So you said it right, because a lot of lawyer doesn't come to practice in Canada. Normally what they do is back home in India as well. A lot of lawyers is like a generational career. Your father is lawyer, your grandfather is lawyer, then you end up getting into law. And also a lot of time, people who never have a legal background like me, they always have backup, like law plus CS. That was my backup. If worse come worse, I was not able to come to Canada because of XYZ reason, I will be still comfortable in India, because in India, practicing law is a totally different ball game. And also, it's like a demand and supply, right? In Canada, what I feel, because I've been practicing in 2 different provinces, here they control the number of lawyers that can be called in Canada. There's not many law schools in Canada, so number is limited in that sense. What I find out, because I was studying in a very reputed college in India, it's a university, Punjab University, very well known in North India, but there was a lot of private colleges. Just to do the simple math, in my year, there was a 300 student, but they are coming from a reputed university. But at the same time, there are so many private students that at one go, maybe 100,000 to 200, 300,000 a student are getting out as a lawyer, right? And then you can imagine the number of influx in compared to
like little above 1 lakh, which is like 100,000.
Yes, 100,000. Yes. So, right. So the simple example is, just to tell your listeners, I was called in Saskatchewan. It's a province. It's in middle of Canada. It's a central province. The province is there for 140 years when I signed on a roll. And you'll be surprised to know my number was 5,209. So that means only 5,208 lawyers were there before me to be called in Saskatchewan, right? So that can say the population is not there, but still that can say that how control the legal field is here. So that's a difference here. If you're a first-time lawyer, nobody in your family is a lawyer, you can still practice here a law. That's kind of main differentiation. But a lot of people, especially from India, they are coming from IT background, various backgrounds. So we'll find less lawyers coming in, but recently, because they have a lot of experience, now they want to come to different countries. So now we are seeing that transition. A lot of people are coming in, but after they have a lot of experience back home in India as a lawyer.
Exactly. And see, this is what I feel. I think you were quite lucky that, you just graduated law school and then you shifted there. So you didn't have any issue in starting from ground zero, right? Because as you said, you couldn't become a lawyer immediately. Like you immigrated in 2010 and it took you 4 years, right? But you didn't have any background here, so you didn't mind. Imagine somebody who has graduated law school, practice for a couple of years as a litigator or as a corporate lawyer, and then he or she won't be able to immediately become a lawyer. And I think they will have a lot more problems starting from ground zero, right? And
Yes,
waiting for 4 years to become a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that you also believe, I wanted to get your inputs on this, because you have studied here in India as well as in Canada, right? So do you think there's a stark difference in the quality of education that we get, which also kind of limits the chances of people ultimately getting enrolled there, because obviously they have to clear an exam, right?
So I'm not the one who will compare which one is better, because both system has their own, props and cons. But simple example, there's no comparison. It's an apple like oranges. These are totally different structure, the way the schooling is back home and in Canada as well. But when I was in law school in India, the main focus is the exams, right? So you have exam, usually before exam, you study, and there is a very straightforward questions, not very situational based. What I find out is when I came to Canada, and I have to give the equivalency exam, they're more like situational cases. And it's even if it's an open book exams, it's very difficult to understand, because you're coming from a closed book exam where there is this very straightforward, they specifically ask you for a specific section and you answer. But here they're putting you in a scenario where you say, you are a lawyer, you are a student, you are a judge, this is a problem, now solve the problem. That's what I find out, which is more catered towards being a lawyer, right? So they start the thinking brain in terms of being a lawyer, right? That's what I find out in terms of educational part, at least. And also, as I mentioned, your demand of law and, supply and demand. Here, they control that part. It's not that many lawyers coming in. So compared to back home in India, where there is so many lawyers graduating every year, that's kind of the main difference I find out as a lawyer. But again, both education system are totally opposite, different. But we cannot say this is better or this is worse.
Very diplomatic answer, just FYI. But never mind. So yeah, I completely agree. Just FYI, right? We also started having a bar examination, and as far as I remember, at least till I was giving the bar exam, it is again an open book exam. The questions are not very situational based, but yeah, at least they have started an open book exam for lawyers at least.
That's very good because I'm talking about 2009 when I graduated, right? So I'm telling you based upon my experience. But yeah, so this is what I've seen, like the difference for myself. And as I said, I can only tell my example, not the in general example, because I don't have that experience specifically, right? So that's why.
Yeah.
Very diplomatic answer, as you said.
No, you have given enough caveats. So I think I graduated in 2013 and I was giving second or third bar exam that time. So it was also fairly new at that time. So now let's talk about your experience at Nanda and Associate Lawyers. So I think you have mentioned that you practice immigration law exclusively. So could you share more about the role and responsibilities, or how is your day-to-day life look like?
Yes. So, as an immigration lawyer, normally in our firm, we have different departments. So, we have immigration law, we have real estate law, we have civil litigation, and so on. So, my role is as an immigration law, I do all aspect of immigration. In Canada, there is like student stream, visitor visas, work permits, there is permanent residence, and there is something called refugee status and appeal. So, as an immigration lawyer, I practice all aspect of immigration law. So in terms of my day, usually, like you get a client intakes, we have a process which we follow. And then I have assistants who report to me, who help me in doing the clerical work. My role is more like talking to clients, retaining them, and then dealing with their specific issues. So simple example is if their file is refused and they want to challenge it in a federal court, which is kind of equivalent to district or a high court in Canada. So this is specialized court, which is for immigration. So where you file your case. So they have a different system. So this is more federal, and there is an appeal divisions, and there is a refugee appeal, there is immigration appeal division. So they have subdivided into judiciary and quasi-judiciary structure.
Okay.
So yeah, so I practice in different areas and different aspect of immigration.
Wow. Thanks for giving that context. I was noticing that the express entry system has seen some significant updates recently, right? So for our listeners who don't know what is the express entry system, first of all, can you explain this concept in simple words?
Yeah. So I'm not sure your listener must have heard, but Canada is a land of immigrants. So in Canada, general population is aging, so they need immigrants. So in order to get qualified immigrants, they started a program called Express Entry back in 2016 and 17, where they were the inception of this program, which give a person points based upon their age, their education, their work experience, whether they have a family member, like specifically brother and sister in Canada, whether they have arranged employment. So total is 1,200 points. And out of 1,200 points, every 2 to 3 weeks, Immigration Canada give a specific number. Is first in, first out, FIFO, they follow. So imagine there is a pool where you put your express of interest. It stays there for 1 year. And in 1 year, give and take, you have 20 to 26 chances where Immigration Canada, depending upon the number or draw, they pick up your profile. Once the profile is picked, you have 60 days to complete the application. Once the application is complete, Immigration Canada looking around 3 to 9 months to complete the process. And if it's granted, you will come in Canada on permanent basis. And a lot of people says, oh, I'm going, once you get the immigration, you can come to Canada and you will call it as a permanent resident. So this is kind of a nutshell about Express Entry. And second part of your question in terms of, updates about Express Entry. Express Entry is very popular, and especially in the last couple of years. Before in Canada, number of immigrants, mostly Chinese were the number one. But in the last few years, the Indians have taken over that number one immigrating population from the world. So a lot of people are coming from India, very qualified, highly qualified person. They are coming in. And in the last few years, since pandemic, they were focusing more on internal. So they have a category called Canadian experience class, which cater about if you have a Canadian experience, then only you'll qualify. Second category is foreign skilled worker, which is where most of the Indians and people from India can qualify. So in the last few months, there's a lot of updates. So they're specifically catering towards, they call it the STEM category, where they are focusing more on IT skills and the people with the specific skill set. So yeah, so these changes are keep on coming in depending upon what they're looking at, what kind of labor shortage they have in Canada. So this program keep on changing. And last few years, Canada has very ambitious plan. And I think for next 3 years, they have such ambitious plan of like, they want to have 450,000, which is equivalent to 450,000 immigrants on a permanent basis to come to Canada for next 3 years. So this is a huge number comparatively. It used to be 300,000, 3 lakh, but they have gone up in last 2 years to that number because, again, the aging population. So I will summarize very simple. Express entry is the way if you want to come to Canada on permanent basis. If you're professional, education is there. If you're fairly young, this is a program for you.
Thanks for that explanation, right? And I noticed that they use some automated technology for the processing of spousal and partner applications. So what are your thoughts on these advancements and how do they benefit applicants?
So one of the way to come to Canada is under express entry. The second way is the sponsorship. So most of the time, simple example is if somebody from here, from Canada, permanent residents or Canadian citizen, went back to India, get married, and they want to bring their spouse. Before it was a process that with pandemic, there was a huge backlog, which kind of created a lot of problems because one of the main principle of Immigration and Refugee Act is family reunification. They want the spouses to be unified. And because of the huge backlog, they're struggling with the processing time. It used to be 12 months before pandemic, but during pandemic, it was upward for 24 to 48 months, some cases. So it had gone like 2 times to 4 times in some cases. So since this change for AI is fairly recent, so what they want to do it with AI, and this is again a very recent update, Immigration Canada want to utilize the new normal, which is AI moving forward, is to assess the processing with simple process because there is 2 parts in this application. One is a sponsor, which the person who's sponsoring, and the person who is back home, who want to be applicant. So they want to streamline and they want to say, okay, for sponsor, these are the criteria. If it's a straightforward application, AI will process and the processing time will be very faster. So I think it's a good start. But at the same time, depending upon how they're going to use this technology has, positive and negative side as well. So I think at this time, Immigration Canada still want to have a human making the final decision of the sponsorship and applicant. So that's a good start, but we'll see in near future how things play out, especially in the sponsorship role.
Makes sense. And you brought in the concept of the new normal, which is living with the AI. How do you perceive generative AI affecting the practice of law and especially immigration law?
It's an excellent question, because again, it's a, every day-to-day basis. For me, I use ChatGPT, different systems. So yes, it's a good start. But again, you have to use it with caution because there was a cases, especially in States, I'm not sure your listeners are aware of this, but in States and also in Canada, they have implemented, especially in federal court, they implemented a strict guideline and disclosure. So if you're using an AI to prepare any of the argument, you have to disclose that you're using AI because what happened in the States, somebody put an argument, the AI specifically has the right word to say is make-up cases. So the cases which doesn't exist was part of the argument and was used directly from the AI or ChatGPT, right? So what I think as an immigration lawyer, yes, there's a huge potential, but at the same time, we need to be, we cannot 100% rely solely on the AI at this point, but future is bright, I will say, depending upon what I've seen and, how it has gone up because there's a lot of startups in India and especially for AI, there's a lot of different, softwares and companies are coming in. So in next few years, it's will be very, very interesting how they gonna use the technology.
Right. Very interesting. And I completely agree with you. So is there any specific use case that, in your opinion, is the low-hanging fruit for implementing AI?
So as of right now, Immigration Canada is using it, right? So they are using exclusively in their processing of the application. For as an immigration lawyer, you are using it, somewhat crafting submission letters. So just a very simple example, but yes, down the line, depending upon the volume, because the Immigration Canada is using for visitor visa for last year and so they started using it for a sponsorship application. And the goal is slowly implementing this AI technology and implementing and integrating where the final decision making should be by a human. So I think that will be the next thing, but it need to be done in a proper way, that's what I'll say. As an immigration lawyer, that's what my concern at this point. Everything need to be done with a caution. Take it at
Absolutely. So, Mandeep, are you ready for the rapid fire round?
Yes.
Awesome. So, what's your favorite legal drama or TV show?
Legal drama, I will say Better Call Saul. This is, I'm not sure, very popular. It's a spin-off show. I have seen few seasons. But yes, if you're looking for a legal background drama, I will say.
Wow. This next question is one book every lawyer should read.
It's not specifically every lawyer. There's a lot of books, but I think The Psychology of Money. I read it last year. It's a good book, specifically not only lawyer, but for everybody to have the idea and the consent. This is what I'll say.
Yeah, I agree. I read that book and it was amazing, right? It kind of expresses the position. Like Indian lawyers will never, or majority of Indian lawyers would never suggest that book because a lot of lawyers in India are not able to make a lot of money. And people who are practicing in Canada, they're saying, legal books छोड़ दो, पैसे कैसे संभालने हैं, right? वो देख लो पहले.
The thing is, the legal book is, very specific, right? The legal, because there is no one book for everybody. But if you're looking for a journal book, I like reading a lot of books. I have read a lot of books. I well read. I listen to a lot of podcasts. So I find out one thing which is never being told, even if you make money or you don't make money, is the whole idea of money, right? I think that books kind of explain the few things about it. So I think everybody should read at some point, understand the concept and what it is said. And very right, beautifully said. Like if any of your listeners want to read this book, just go towards the end where the writer actually talk about his own idea about the money and everything. So this was kind of explained with a very good story. So you're right in terms of the profession here. It's not like everybody is very, very lucrative, but at least still it's a good profession in Canada compared to law of demand and supply, I will say.
Right. Relatively, it's a lot more lucrative, no doubt about it. And if you want a recommendation of the next book, the same author has recently come out with another book which is called Same as Ever. I'm in middle of it. And
okay. That's good. What's the name?
Same as Ever. So the author essentially talks about what are the things that never change, right? And as an entrepreneur, I think that's also a good way to look at stuff. Because the whole idea is that some things are never going to change. So why don't we invest in things that never going to change? So now there's so much hue and cry about and so much hype about AI, right? But my approach is like use AI to solve problems which are always going to be there. Like, essentially finding meaning, finding purpose, after the basic needs are met, like, the whole shebang essentially. So that's a good book. I'm still in middle of it and I won't wholeheartedly recommend that. I have like a couple of reservations, but I'm digressing. Let's come back to your rapid fire now. So please tell us, what is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
Every day you're learning something. Every day you're getting, something. I think one of the advice my assistant said to me, when you get a complicated case, I think you are ready. So if your cases are getting complicated, that means your experience is getting there. That's why you are able to handle those complicated cases. So that's I kind of look, whenever I get a complicated case, I always look into that part and say, okay, now I'm ready. That's why I can handle this kind of specific case. So
wow.
That's, I will say, just for lawyer's sake, right?
Yeah. It's a very interesting way to look at problems, like looking problems as an opportunity. Next question. What is your most memorable client interaction?
So as an immigration lawyer, I usually, when they retain me till the end, I also shared in my LinkedIn, there was a client in 2020, just before the pandemic started. They came here, their refugee case was denied. There's two of them, husband and wife. So normally what happened with a lot of clients, especially from Indian origin, they retain you for one thing, and if thing doesn't work out that way, they switch, they find another lawyer. But this couple, not only stayed with me for 4 years, but in between they had their little family, they have a child born. And after 4 years, they become a permanent resident. So that interaction when we have from the start, they retained me somewhere in February of 2020. And I think fairly recent, like a month ago, I got the PR and they got the PR. So that interaction was amazing. But as I said, there's a lot of like these kind of interactions with my clients, and especially I keep it very simple when I retain a client. And for the final, when they get a permanent residence or whatever the file we usually get, a positive or negative, it's my call. I usually call them personally. I don't send them an email. Just call them, hey, you got a PR, you got a work permit, you got a study permit, whatever the. So that kind of conversation always give me a very rewarding and fulfilling for personal sake. But yes, all those interactions are always dear to me in that sense.
Well, thanks a lot for sharing that. The last question is, what is the biggest misconception about immigration law that you would like to debunk?
So mostly, I'll just strictly focus to India, right? In India, because with Immigration Canada, there's two type of professional that can practice immigration. Either you are an immigration lawyer or you're an immigration consultant. But in India specifically, there is a lot of fake consultant, which usually, promise you a lot of things, but in the end will not deliver. So that's where I would like to say specifically to your, listeners, because there is so many people who come to me after they get either dumped by their consultants or fake consultant, I will say, or no professionalism whatsoever. So I think that will be the best piece. Immigration law, especially in Canada, if you do it, practice properly, it's a good country to come in, all of those things. So this is what I will say. Specifically in India, I've seen so many of those fake consultant who doesn't have the required knowledge. They're using the same, if it work in one file, it will work for every file. So this is a loose term, but yes. So what I'll suggest is in India, there is a lot of people who are not qualified to practice Canadian immigration, but they have their own consultancies or, the firms and things like that. So what I'll suggest is always, as an inspiring student or inspiring immigrant, please make sure the consultant has the required credentials. Either he's a Canadian immigration lawyer or he's a Canadian consultant in order to practice, because there is a specific designations for this. And also in Canada, any person, like simple example is Mandeep Chaudhery. If you search, you can search me in Law Society of Saskatchewan and Law Society of Ontario, and it will show that I have a valid license and everything. And same thing goes with the consultants. So usually they have a college of consultant where you can search their information and can find out whether this person is actually authorized to practice. That's the first thing. Second thing is kind of a red flag, or what I've seen is they usually ask the individual to, why not we use your email and we'll create an account in your email. Being a consultant and being a lawyer, usually you have access to Immigration Canada portal. As a lawyer, I never recommend anybody to put your profile through that email, depending upon circumstances, because some clients really want to have access. So this is another red flag that I will say person should keep in mind when they're deciding whether this person is for them, and especially the agent or a consultant back home in India. That's what I will say. These are my few departing comments, especially in regarding the fake consultant part.
Wow, thanks a lot for that, Mandeep, and also for the coming on the podcast and sharing your story and your expert insights in immigration law. It was really informative and inspiring at the same time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was my pleasure. I was able to speak to you.
Thanks a lot, Mandeep. Wow, that was an enlightening conversation with Mandeep Chaudhery. We hope you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful as we did. Be sure to follow Mandeep on LinkedIn for more of his wisdom and updates. Until next time, stay caffeinated, stay curious. This is your host, Avinash Tripathi, signing off. Thanks to our listeners for tuning in to Let's Discuss Cafe.